My rich wife, the CEO, threw me out after believing her sister's lies. 3 weeks later, she asked if I'd reflected instead. I handed her divorce papers. Her sister lost it. You know how they say hindsight's 20/20? Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes you can see the train wreck coming from a mile away, but you're too damn stubborn to get off the tracks. That's basically the story of my life. Or at least the story of the 44 years leading up to this spectacular mess I'm about to lay on you. My name's Marcus Hale, and up until about 3 months ago, I believed I was living the American dream. Picture this: a decent-looking guy with a solid career in project management, married to one of the most powerful women in the city. Clara Whitmore. Yeah, that Whitmore, the one whose face graces the cover of Forbes every other month, was my wife. CEO of Whitmore Luxury Real Estate, a company that basically owns half the prime real estate from Manhattan to the Hamptons. When people heard I was married to Clara Whitmore, their jaws would hit the floor so hard you could hear the thud from 3 blocks away. On paper, we were absolutely perfect. She brought the big bucks, the connections, the kind of influence that gets you tables at restaurants that don't even have names on their doors. Me, I brought stability, reliability, and what she used to call that charming everyman quality that keeps me grounded. Translation: I was the normal guy who made her feel like she wasn't completely living in an ivory tower made of $100 bills. Our wedding photos looked like something straight out of Architectural Digest. Her penthouse overlooked Central Park with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you were floating above the peasants below. The marble kitchen island cost more than most people's cars. And don't even get me started on the wine cellar that housed bottles worth more than my college education. Clara would joke that marrying me was the best investment she'd ever made. And I'd laugh along, thinking she meant it in the sweet, romantic way couples talk about being each other's better halves. Spoiler alert, she didn't. But here's where our fairy tale takes a hard left into nightmare territory. See, Clara had this younger sister, Sabrina Whitmore. And if Clara was the golden child who could do no wrong, then Sabrina was the family's professional disappointment wrapped in designer clothes and an attitude that could curdle milk. Sabrina was 28, unemployed by choice, and had perfected the art of living off her sister's generosity like it was an Olympic sport. She had this whole setup going. Clara paid for her Manhattan apartment, her credit cards, her gym membership, her therapy sessions, her organic juice cleanses, and probably her monthly manicures that cost more than some people spend on groceries. Sabrina liked to call it family support, but the rest of us called it what it was: freeloading with a trust fund twist. From day one, Sabrina looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in during her morning jog through Central Park. Not that she actually jogged. Physical exertion was beneath someone of her refined sensibilities. But you get the picture. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual drop-by visit, she'd give me this look. You know the one. Like she was mentally calculating exactly how much of her sister's money I was going to cost them over the years. The thing about Sabrina was that she had this talent for making her poison sound like concern. Clara, honey, don't you think Marcus seems a little too comfortable with your lifestyle? She'd say, her voice dripping with fake worry. I mean, it's so sweet how he's adapted to luxury so quickly, almost like he was born for it, you know? And Clara, bless her brilliant but naive heart, would just nod along like Sabrina was dropping profound wisdom instead of passive-aggressive grenades designed to blow up my marriage from the inside. The dinner table conversations became my personal hell. Picture this scene. Clara at the head of the table, discussing her latest multi-million-dollar deal while casually sipping wine that cost more per bottle than most people make in a week. Me trying to contribute something meaningful to the conversation while simultaneously wondering if my middle-class background was written all over my face like a scarlet letter. And Sabrina sitting there with that smirk. Oh, that damn smirk. Like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Marcus, tell us about your day, Sabrina would say with fake sweetness. And somehow she'd make it sound like she was asking me to explain quantum physics to a toddler. Did you manage any interesting projects today? Nothing too stressful, I hope. We wouldn't want you getting overwhelmed. The subtext was always there, thick as molasses. You don't belong here. You're not good enough for my sister. You're just another gold digger with better manners. And slowly, painfully, I started to notice Clara changing. The woman who used to look at me like I hung the moon began studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Her laugh became more polite than genuine. Her questions about my work started sounding less like interest and more like interrogation. "How was your day, sweetheart?" became, "So, what exactly did you accomplish today?" The shift was subtle at first, like watching paint dry or grass grow, but it was there. Every conversation felt like I was being cross-examined by a prosecutor who'd already decided I was guilty. Sabrina was a master manipulator, the kind of person who could plant seeds of doubt so skillfully that you'd swear they grew there naturally. She never outright accused me of anything. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she'd make these little comments, these tiny suggestions that burrowed into Clara's brain like psychological termites. "I just worry about you sometimes, Clara," she'd say during their sister bonding sessions that I wasn't invited to. "You're so trusting, so generous. Some people might take advantage of that beautiful heart of yours." And Clara, who could spot a bad business deal from a mile away, who could negotiate million-dollar contracts in her sleep, somehow couldn't see that her own sister was playing her like a fiddle. The worst part? I could see it happening. Every single day, I watched my marriage crumble one whispered conversation at a time. One raised eyebrow, one perfectly timed sigh from Sabrina. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash where you're the passenger and someone else is driving straight toward the guardrail. I tried talking to Clara about it once. Big mistake. Huge. She looked at me like I just suggested her sister was running a meth lab out of her Park Avenue apartment. "Sabrina loves me, Marcus. She's just looking out for me. Maybe if you tried harder to understand her instead of always being defensive." That's when I realized I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. Because in Clara's mind, I was the outsider, the variable that didn't quite fit the equation of her perfect life. Sabrina had been there first, had 28 years of history, and shared memories and inside jokes. I had 3 years of marriage and a growing reputation as the paranoid husband who couldn't handle his sister-in-law's honest concern. But here's what neither of them knew. I might have been the stable, reliable, everyman husband, but I wasn't stupid. And I sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I'd just roll over and accept whatever fate they decided for me. Boy, were they wrong. If I thought Chapter 1 was bad, let me tell you about the masterclass in psychological warfare that Sabrina put on during the following months. This woman didn't just thrive on drama. She practically had a PhD in it. I'm talking about someone who could create conflict in an empty room and somehow make it everyone else's fault. You ever meet someone who treats lying like an art form? That was Sabrina Whitmore in a nutshell. She didn't just tell lies. She crafted them, polished them, and served them up with such conviction that you'd start questioning your own memories. It was honestly impressive in the most terrifying way possible. The affair accusations started on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to meet Clara for lunch at that overpriced bistro she loved downtown. The kind of place where they charge $30 for a salad and call it artisanal. I was running late from a client meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Rain check on lunch. Need to think about some things Sabrina told me." Some things Sabrina told her. Those 6 words should have come with a hazmat warning because they were about to poison everything we'd built together. When I got home that evening, the temperature in our penthouse felt like it had dropped about 20 degrees. Clara was sitting in her favorite chair, the white leather monstrosity that cost more than most people's monthly rent, with this look on her face like she'd just discovered I'd been running a human trafficking ring out of our spare bedroom. "We need to talk," she said. And brother, if you've ever been married, you know those 4 words are basically the relationship equivalent of code red. All hands on deck. Prepare for impact. "Sure, babe. What's up?" I said, trying to keep things light while my stomach was doing gymnastics routines that would make an Olympic athlete jealous. Clara took a deep breath, the kind you take before you jump off a cliff or tell someone their dog died. "Sabrina saw you having lunch with a woman today. A blonde woman at Cafe Milano." Now, here's where it gets absolutely ridiculous. First off, I wasn't at Cafe Milano. I was in a conference room with 3 middle-aged guys discussing pipeline schedules for a construction project. Second, the only blonde I'd interacted with all day was the barista at Starbucks who spelled my name Marcos, despite me spelling it out for her. But Sabrina had planted this seed, and Clara was already nurturing it like it was going to bloom into a beautiful garden of justified suspicion. "Clara, honey, I was in meetings all day. I can show you my calendar, my emails. Hell, I can probably get security footage from my office building if you want." But here's the thing about Sabrina's lies. they were never just about the facts. They were about creating an atmosphere, painting a picture, building a narrative where I was the villain and she was the concerned sister trying to save Clara from heartbreak. "It's not just today, Marcus," Clara said, and I could practically hear Sabrina's voice coming out of her mouth. "She's been noticing things, the way you've been dressing better lately, how you've been staying late at work more often, the fact that you've been more attentive to your appearance." I stared at her like she just told me the earth was flat and birds were government surveillance drones. "You mean I've been dressing better because you bought me better clothes? And staying late because we landed 3 new major clients? And taking care of my appearance because I'm married to one of the most successful women in the city and I don't want to embarrass you at business functions?" But logic doesn't work when someone's already decided you're guilty. Clara had that look in her eyes, the same one she got when she was closing a particularly difficult real estate deal. She'd made up her mind, and now she was just looking for evidence to support her conclusion. The money accusations came next because apparently I was supposed to be both an unfaithful husband and a financial parasite. According to Sabrina's latest intel, I'd been funneling funds into side businesses and using Clara's connections for personal gain. This was rich coming from someone whose only job was professionally spending her sister's money. But hey, who's keeping track? She showed me bank statements. "Marcus, transfers you've been making, money going into accounts I don't recognize." This is where I almost laughed because the mysterious transfers were me putting money into a savings account to surprise Clara with a trip to Italy for our anniversary. The unknown accounts were literally marked Anniversary Fund Italy Trip in my banking app. But Sabrina had taken screenshots at just the right angle to make it look suspicious, like some kind of financial forensics expert who'd flunked out of detective school. "Clara, those are savings for your anniversary present. I can log into my account right now and show you." And she said, and I could practically hear Sabrina whispering in her ear, "You could have set that up as a cover story in case I found out." This is when I realized I was dealing with conspiracy theory levels of paranoia. No matter what evidence I provided, there was always another explanation that painted me as the bad guy. It was like playing chess with someone who changed the rules every time they were about to lose. The worst part wasn't even the accusations themselves. It was watching Clara transform into someone I didn't recognize. This woman who used to trust me completely, who would defend me against anyone and everyone, was now treating every word out of my mouth like it needed to be fact-checked by 3 independent sources. My friends tried to warn me. Dave from work took me out for drinks and said, "Dude, that sister-in-law of yours is straight up toxic. Clara is letting her pull the strings like she's a puppet." My buddy Mike was more direct. "Brother, you need to get ahead of this situation before it gets worse. That Sabrina chick has it out for you, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." But I was stubborn. I thought love would win out over manipulation. I thought 3 years of marriage would count for more than a lifetime of sisterly bonds built on financial dependency and emotional manipulation. I thought Clara would eventually see through Sabrina's games and realize what was happening. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Catastrophically, spectacularly wrong. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Thursday night. I remember because we were supposed to watch the season finale of that show Clara liked. The one about rich people with rich people problems that somehow made our actual rich people problems seem quaint by comparison. Instead, Clara was waiting for me in the living room with what looked like a full presentation prepared. I'm talking printed emails, highlighted bank statements, a timeline of my alleged infidelities that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. Sabrina's fingerprints were all over it, but Clara presented it like she'd uncovered it all herself. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus," she said, her voice colder than a Manhattan winter. Sabrina wouldn't lie to me about something this serious. She loves me. She's looking out for me. And everything she's told me, it all adds up. That's when I knew I'd lost. Not because of anything I'd done, but because Sabrina had played the long game perfectly. She'd convinced Clara that love meant suspicion, that trust was naive, and that the sister who'd been bleeding her dry financially was more reliable than the husband who'd been building a life with her. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But sometimes when you're in the middle of the storm, you can't see the hurricane forming around you. The house that once felt like home had officially become enemy territory. You know that moment in movies where the protagonist gets the rug pulled out from under them, and there's always this dramatic music swelling in the background while they stand there looking shocked and betrayed? Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. And let me tell you, getting kicked out of your own home is a lot less cinematic and a lot more soul-crushingly pathetic than Hollywood would have you believe. It was a Friday evening in October. I remember because the leaves in Central Park were just starting to turn, and I'd been thinking about how Clara and I used to take walks through there during our first autumn together. Funny how your brain focuses on the stupidest details when your world's about to implode. I'd just gotten home from work, loosening my tie and looking forward to a quiet weekend. Maybe ordering from that Thai place Clara liked, watching something mindless on Netflix. You know, normal married couple stuff. Instead, I walked into what felt like a corporate boardroom meeting where I was both the defendant and the guy who didn't get the memo about what he was being accused of. Clara was standing in our living room. Excuse me, her living room, as I was about to be reminded, wearing that navy blue power suit that meant business. Not the fun kind of business either. The kind of business that ends with someone getting fired, divorced, or in my case, both simultaneously. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was colder than a penguin's ass in Antarctica. And behind her, like some sort of designer-dressed demon whispering in her ear, stood Sabrina with a smirk that could have powered half of Manhattan. "We need to talk," Clara said, which was becoming her favorite phrase lately. It was like she'd trademarked those 4 words and decided to use them as a weapon of mass destruction against my peace of mind. "Okay," I said, setting down my briefcase and trying to read the room. The vibe was somewhere between funeral parlor and execution chamber, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a conversation about weekend plans or whose turn it was to pick up the dry cleaning. Clara took a deep breath, the kind you take before you perform surgery or demolish a building. "Pack your things, Marcus. I can't trust you anymore." Just like that. No preamble, no lengthy explanation, no dramatic build-up. Just a sentence that hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of what the actual hell. I stood there for a moment waiting for the punchline or the hidden camera crew or literally anything that would make this make sense. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say because apparently my brain had decided to take a little vacation right when I needed it most. "You heard me," Clara said, and her voice had that flat executive tone she used when she was firing underperforming employees. "I want you out of this house tonight. I can't have someone I don't trust living under my roof anymore." Under her roof? Not our roof. Her roof. Because apparently 3 years of marriage had just been me crashing at Clara's place like some kind of overstayed house guest who'd finally worn out his welcome. Behind her, Sabrina was practically vibrating with satisfaction. She wasn't even trying to hide her glee anymore. The mask was off, the gloves were down, and she was basking in her victory like a cat who'd just caught the biggest, dumbest mouse in the history of pest control. "Clara, honey, let's talk about this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, like I was negotiating a business deal instead of fighting for my marriage. "Whatever Sabrina told you." Clara held up her hand like a traffic cop stopping a speeding car. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on my sister. Sabrina didn't make you lie to me. Sabrina didn't make you sneak around behind my back. Sabrina didn't make you use me for my money and connections." It was like listening to a greatest hits album of all the garbage Sabrina had been feeding her for months. Every suggestion, every twisted half-truth, every poisonous lie, delivered with the conviction of someone who'd completely bought into the con. "None of that is true, Clara, and you know it," I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to stay cool. "I've never lied to you. I've never cheated on you, and I sure as hell have never used you for anything. I love you." Sabrina actually snorted at that. Literally snorted like I just told the world's worst joke at the world's most inappropriate time. "Oh, please, Marcus. Save the performance for someone who's buying tickets." "I'm not talking to you," I said, turning to look directly at her for the first time since this nightmare conversation started. "In fact, I'm pretty sure none of this is any of your damn business. It became my business the moment you started hurting my sister." Sabrina shot back, her voice dripping with fake righteous indignation. Clara deserves better than someone who lies to her face every single day. That's when Clara stepped in, and the way she positioned herself slightly in front of Sabrina, like she was protecting her from me, told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalties lay. Sabrina wouldn't lie to me about something this serious, Marcus. She loves me. She's looking out for me. And frankly, she's been right about you from the beginning. Right about me from the beginning. As in, Sabrina had been planning my downfall since day one, and Clara was just now admitting it out loud. As in, my wife had been listening to her sister poison our marriage for 3 years, and instead of defending our relationship, she'd been taking notes. So that's it? I asked, and I could feel something hardening inside my chest, like my heart was turning to stone in real time. 3 years of marriage, and you're just going to throw it all away because your unemployed, freeloading sister convinced you I'm some kind of criminal mastermind? The unemployed and freeloading comments hit their mark. Sabrina's face flushed red, and for a second, I saw a crack in her smug facade. But Clara stepped even further forward, her CEO instincts kicking in to protect her investment. Leave, Marcus. Now, before I call security. Security. She was threatening to call security on her own husband. In the home we'd shared for 3 years. The home where we'd laughed together, fought together, made love, made plans for the future, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays. She was going to have me escorted out like some kind of trespasser who'd overstayed his welcome at a house party. I looked around the living room one last time, at the couch where we used to watch movies together, at the dining table where we'd hosted dinner parties, at the windows that looked out over the city we'd planned to grow old in together. All of it felt foreign now, like I was looking at someone else's life through a museum display case. Fine, I said, and my voice sounded strange and distant, even to me. I'll pack a bag. As I headed toward the bedroom. Excuse me, her bedroom. To grab some clothes and essentials, I could hear Sabrina whispering something to Clara, probably cementing her victory with some final poisonous observation about how this proved she'd been right all along. I threw some shirts, pants, underwear, and toiletries into a single duffel bag, moving on autopilot while my brain tried to process what had just happened. 3 years of my life reduced to whatever I could fit in one bag during a 10-minute packing session while my wife's sister watched from the doorway, like a prison guard making sure I didn't steal the silver. When I walked back into the living room, Clara was standing by the door, holding it open like she couldn't wait to get me out of her sight. Sabrina was practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. "This is a mistake, Clara," I said one last time. "And someday you're going to realize it. The only mistake I made was trusting you in the first place," she replied, not even looking at me. So I walked out. I walked out of the penthouse, out of the building, out of the life I'd built with someone I thought loved me enough to at least give me the benefit of the doubt. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt like a coffin lid slamming shut. Standing on the sidewalk with my single bag, watching taxis and pedestrians go about their normal Friday evening routines, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Underneath all the hurt and anger and betrayal, there was this weird sense of relief. Like I'd finally stopped pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, and promising to be a better boy. They had no idea what they just unleashed. You ever been to one of those fancy spas where they put you in a sensory deprivation tank and tell you it's supposed to be therapeutic? Well, let me tell you about the 3 weeks I spent in my crappy downtown apartment, because it was basically the same experience except instead of finding inner peace, I was plotting the most elegant revenge in the history of marital warfare. My new place was what real estate agents like to call cozy, and normal people call a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. 600 square feet of pure mediocrity, complete with a refrigerator that sounded like a dying whale, and neighbors who apparently thought practicing interpretive dance at 2 o'clock in the morning was a perfectly reasonable life choice. After 3 years of living in Clara's penthouse palace, this place felt like I'd been demoted from first class to the cargo hold of life. But you know what? It was mine. Nobody could kick me out of it. Nobody could stand in the living room and tell me to pack my things because they didn't trust me anymore. And most importantly, nobody could fill the air with poisonous whispers about what a terrible person I was while I was trying to watch Netflix and eat cereal for dinner like a functioning adult. The first few days were rough. I'll admit it. I spent a lot of time staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had taken such a hard left turn into Crazyville. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for Clara, only to remember that Clara was probably having champagne breakfast with her psychotic sister, celebrating their victory over the evil husband who'd apparently been running some kind of long-con marriage scam for 3 years. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It's actually pretty solid ground to build on. And while I was sitting there in my apartment eating takeout Chinese food and wondering if this was what a midlife crisis looked like, something interesting started happening. My phone wasn't ringing. Not once. Not a single call from Clara asking how I was doing, or if I was okay, or if maybe we should talk about things like adults instead of letting her sister orchestrate my exile, like some kind of designer-dressed puppet master. Radio silence. Complete and total radio silence, which told me everything I needed to know about how much my 3-year marriage had really meant to her. Apparently, throwing out your husband was like throwing out old furniture. Once it's gone, you don't really think about it anymore. But Sabrina was having the time of her life. Social media became her personal victory lap, and I got to watch the whole show from my front row seat in Loserville. Instagram stories featuring expensive lunches with captions like, "So grateful for family who really have your back." Facebook posts about toxic people and how sometimes you have to cut dead weight to truly flourish. Twitter updates about supporting strong women who deserve better. Each post was like a little digital middle finger aimed directly at me. And the worst part? She was doing it all from Clara's accounts, Clara's events, Clara's money. The unemployed sister who'd never worked a day in her life was playing social media influencer with someone else's success. And somehow I was the villain in this story. But instead of getting pissed off, which is what the old Marcus would have done, I started getting curious. Because here's what didn't add up. If I was such a terrible husband, such a lying, cheating, money-grabbing scumbag, why wasn't Clara talking about it? Why wasn't she posting her own free at last celebration posts? Why was Sabrina doing all the public victory dancing while Clara stayed conspicuously quiet? That's when I started paying attention to the details. And brother, when you're a project manager who spent 20 years of his career catching other people's mistakes and fixing other people's messes, you develop a pretty good eye for things that don't quite line up. Like the fact that Clara's company had been unusually quiet lately. No big announcements, no new developments. No press releases about record-breaking sales quarters. For a woman who usually treated her business success like a full-contact sport, the silence was deafening. Like the fact that Sabrina's social media posts, while frequent and obnoxious, were all taking place at the same handful of locations. The penthouse, that overpriced cafe Clara liked, the same 3 or 4 restaurants. For someone who was supposedly living her best life, she wasn't getting around much. Like the fact that none of Clara's business associates or friends had reached out to me. Not to offer condolences, not to ask what happened, not even to be nosy about the divorce rumors that were probably circulating through their social circles like wildfire. In a community where gossip traveled faster than bad stock tips, the complete silence was weird. So, I started doing what I do best, research. Not the creepy stalker kind of research. I'm not a psychopath. But the methodical, professional kind of research that comes from years of managing complex projects where one missed detail can cost everyone involved a fortune. I started with the easy stuff. Public records, business filings, anything that was legally available to anyone who bothered to look. And that's when things started getting interesting. Turns out Whitmore Luxury Real Estate had been having what you might call a challenging fiscal quarter. Several deals had fallen through. A couple of major investors had pulled out, and there were some regulatory issues with a development project that had been Clara's pet project for the past 2 years. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely not the kind of smooth sailing Clara was used to. Then I started looking into the prenup. You remember the prenup, right? The one Clara had insisted on back when we were so in love that she wanted to make sure I was protected if anything ever happened to her business empire. The one she drafted when she was still thinking with her heart, instead of listening to her sister's paranoid fantasies. Here's something most people don't know about prenups. They're not just about protecting the wealthy spouse from the poor spouse. Sometimes, depending on how they're written and when they're signed, they can work the other way around, especially when the wealthy spouse initiates a divorce based on false accusations and refuses to attempt counseling or mediation. I spent hours reading through that document. And let me tell you, 3 years ago, Clara had been a very different person from current Clara. 3 years ago, Clara had been madly in love and wanted to make sure I felt secure in our marriage. She'd insisted on clauses that would protect me if she ever became abusive, controlling, or unfaithful. She'd included provisions for substantial alimony if the marriage ended due to her misconduct or unreasonable behavior. Unreasonable behavior like, say, Throwing your husband out of the house based on lies told by your freeloading sister without any evidence of actual wrongdoing, and refusing to even attempt to work through your problems like adults. Current Clara probably didn't even remember those clauses. She'd been so focused on protecting her assets from a hypothetical bad husband that she'd accidentally created a legal safety net for the good husband she was about to throw away. While I was discovering this interesting legal tidbit, I also started documenting everything. Screenshots of Sabrina's social media posts, particularly the ones that could be interpreted as harassment or defamation. Records of all my attempts to contact Clara and work things out. Evidence of my actual whereabouts during the time Sabrina claimed I was having affairs or conducting mysterious business meetings. And slowly, quietly, methodically, I started building a case that would have made my old law school professors proud. Not because I was planning to destroy anyone. I'm not a vindictive person by nature, but because I was finally done being the victim in someone else's twisted family drama. The phone call from Clara came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after she'd kicked me out. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading through some particularly interesting financial documents I'd requested from our accountant when my phone buzzed with her name. For a split second, I thought about not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Marcus. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. We need to talk. Have you had time to reflect? Reflect? Like I was a naughty child who'd been sent to his room to think about what he'd done wrong. Sure, Clara, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. I've had plenty of time to reflect. Good. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Say 2 o'clock. I think we should discuss how to move forward. Move forward. Translation. She wanted to see if I was ready to come crawling back, apologize for crimes I didn't commit, and probably sign some kind of agreement that would let her file for divorce while maintaining the moral high ground. I'll be there, I said. And I would be, but not for the reason she thought. Time to show Clara and her manipulative sister exactly what 3 weeks of reflection had produced. You know that feeling when you're playing poker and you've got a royal flush, but you have to sit there with a straight face while everyone else at the table thinks they're about to clean you out? That's exactly how I felt sitting in my crappy apartment the morning after Clara's phone call, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through gym socks while mentally preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Clara wanted to meet at her office. Of course, she did. Because why have a personal conversation about the implosion of your marriage in a neutral location when you can do it in the executive boardroom where you hold all the power? It was a classic Clara move. Control the environment. Control the narrative. Control the outcome. She probably had her whole speech prepared, maybe even had her assistant schedule it between her 10 o'clock with the Peterson account and her 3:30 with the city planning committee. Have you had time to reflect? She'd asked, like I was some kind of wayward employee who'd been suspended pending a performance review. The arrogance of that question was honestly breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd thrown her husband out of their home based on the word of her professional mooch of a sister. And she was asking me if I'd learned my lesson yet. Oh, I'd reflected all right. I'd reflected so hard I was practically a goddamn philosopher at this point. I spent the morning getting ready like I was preparing for war, which in a way I was. Shower, shave, the whole 9 yards. I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Clara had bought me for her company's annual gala last year, back when she was still proud to have me as arm candy at her business functions. Ironic, really. I was about to use her own gift to look professional while I systematically dismantled the assumptions that had led to this moment. The briefcase was the key prop in today's little drama. Black leather, expensive looking, the kind of thing that screams serious business in any corporate setting. Clara had given it to me for our 2nd anniversary, back when she thought having a project manager husband was charming instead of embarrassing. Inside, I'd carefully arranged all my research from the past 3 weeks. Copies of the prenup with the relevant sections highlighted, financial records, bank statements, screenshots of Sabrina's social media posts, documentation of my actual whereabouts during the times I was supposedly cheating. But the real beauty of my preparation wasn't what I'd included. It was what I'd left out, because sometimes the most effective strategy isn't showing all your cards at once. Sometimes it's about letting your opponents think they know what you're holding while you keep the royal flush hidden until the perfect moment. I got to Clara's office building about 20 minutes early because punctuality was one of those middle-class habits I'd never been able to shake, even after years of living in the penthouse. The lobby was all marble and glass, and the kind of aggressive minimalism that screams, "We charge $500 an hour and we're worth every penny." The security guard nodded at me like he recognized me, which he probably did from all the times I'd come here to surprise Clara with lunch or flowers, or just to be a supportive husband during her particularly stressful weeks. Those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, listening to the kind of generic jazz that's designed to make you feel sophisticated while you wait to get screwed over by people in expensive suits. The receptionist, Jessica, I think her name was, smiled at me with that professional warmth that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Mr. Hale, it's been a while. Mrs. Whitmore is expecting you. Conference room A. Conference room A. The big one. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The one where Clara held her most important meetings with investors and city officials. She wasn't just meeting with me. She was making a statement. This was business now, not personal. I was being summoned to the principal's office to discuss my behavioral issues. I sat in the waiting area, watching Clara's employees go about their daily routines. These were people I'd met at company parties, people who'd congratulated me when Clara and I got married, people who had probably been gossiping about my mysterious disappearance for the past 3 weeks. I wondered how many of them knew the real story versus Sabrina's version of events. I wondered how many of them actually cared. The thing about corporate environments is that they have this way of making everything feel important and official, even when it's just personal drama dressed up in business attire. But that formality works both ways. If Clara wanted to treat this like a business meeting, then I was going to give her the full professional experience. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Documents ready when you are. Give them hell." Documents, plural. Because while Clara had been spending the past 3 weeks basking in her victory over the terrible husband, I'd been doing something she apparently hadn't considered. I'd been getting legal.